Welcome back to News Center. Of course, the discussion is on violence against children, and in studio, I'm joined by Kennedy Owino. He's the Senior Children's Officer, National Council for Children's Services. Next to him is Mark Odhiambo Care. He is the Assistant Director, Children's Services, Ministry of Labour and Social Protection. Gentlemen, we were having that conversation a bit earlier on this whole situation of violence against children. But let's talk about now the interventions that are in place. Kennedy, to start off with you, what are the interventions by state and non-state actors, or even communities, specific ones?
Thank you. The interventions are various depending on the thematic areas. So and Kenya is one of the countries that have done qualitative analysis of this violence against children.
Right.
We are not just only considering the numbers. We also dig deep into what are the causes, what are the underlying issues behind this. So the first one relates to policy and legislation. And the policy and legislation, we are looking at what are the gaps in terms of policy and legislation. And earlier I said that one of the gaps realized that, you see, FGM, there's an FGM and Prohibition Act of 2013. But now they are going the medicalization way. So it calls for a policy review, a legislative review, so that we criminalize that. You also look in terms of sexual offenses. Most of these sexual violation of children, as VAC revealed, were teenage to teenagers, children to children themselves. So again, and previously, it was more discriminatory to the boy child.
Right.
Because the boys were, you find most of them were sentenced to postal institutions.
Yeah.
So again, we are also making a review to that, so that we treat them as children in need of care protection, children who need proper parental guidance, children who need to be talked to on the danger of what they're engaging into and the responsibility it comes with. So that is in terms of policy and legislation. And you also understand that as a country, when violence happens, the prevalence, the highest rate prevalence was within the family.
Right.
So the first question is, why the family? The family as a social unit and a fundamental unit of upbringing of a child is disintegrating in the country.
Right.
The rate at which families are becoming non-functional is very high. So we want to look at the programs that now strengthen the family in terms of their socio-economic and in terms of also promoting their resilience. Because something like a family going through a hardship economic situation, what happens? They disintegrate. When they disintegrate, hardly do they think of what's the fate of our children.
Of course.
Yes. Issues of drug and substance abuse. When we have parents who use drugs or abuse them, then when they are drunk, out of that psychological status, what happens? They end up abusing their children. So we are also having a lot of focus into the family. And also going through the issue of the cultures that have normalized child abuse. I come from, some of us came from that background whereby if you don't punish your child inflicting physical pain, then you're not treating the child well.
You're not doing proper parenting.
Yes.
Sort of, yeah.
And even the country, we even have communities that before you assault your wife, you don't laugh. That's your wife. That's true. So we're also going to the aspect that saying, let us not normalize child abuse and violence on children. But what are the causes? These are the causes we're handling. And Mark had said that in terms of releasing the economic burden of the community, the government has come up with social protection programs. Even currently, there is ongoing registration, and I think they have enlisted a number of beneficiaries to benefit from the cash transfers as a social protection mechanism to build the resilience of the family, to make them more stable and dependent. Because poverty is one of the reasons of violence against children. If you can't provide for those children, they look somewhere else to be provided for their needs. Yes.
Wow, interesting. You want to add anything on that?
Yes, I must add something.
Yeah.
As we will be celebrating also the UN International Children's Day on 20th, on 22nd to 24th, we'll be having an international conference on child protection. And that is also an intervention zone, because then when stakeholders, both state and non-state actors, come together, then they discuss and find out what are the emerging issues. Like for this year, the emerging issue actually was on violence against children, and specifically the Shakahola issue, which is religious fanaticism, and therefore now we give an opportunity in such kind of forums for both academicians and practitioners to come and compare notes, share, find out even with the studies and therefore take a stand. Like at the end of it, we'll take a stand on ending violence against child and use the evidence, like Mr. Wino has said, the policies that we have in place. What are the gaps? And then now action on it, meaning that we now develop our activities and do programs around the evidence that we have so that they can intervene on the child. And lastly, I wanted also to add that there should be change.
Yeah.
We should always what we call community education. And community education is not necessarily just about sensitization and awareness creation, but that ways that are sustainable, that communities get to learn that what they are currently practicing or what they currently take as normal is really not normal, because then it impacts negatively on the child. So when we do that, we do it through programming. Both government does its programs and also the non-state actors through the programs.
Right. We've talked about now the interventions and the policies and what needs to be reworked, but let's talk about, is there a need for public financing now when it comes to violence against children's interventions?
Public financing is a challenge to all actors in the country currently. You know the situation in the country in terms of finances. But I can say in the children's sector, we don't want to look at it from the perspective that it is only the sole responsibility of the government, because the children belongs to all of us.
Right.
So Mark has said something which is very important: the role of the corporate organizations, the role of the non-state actors, the civil societies, even the community. So we are moving from the aspect of saying at what is the government funding per se in terms of violence against children, but we are looking at it. What is our contribution at that local level? What is contribution of that local church? What is contribution of that family unit? What is the contribution of that self-help group? You know, that chama ya wamama in terms of violence against children.
Right.
I'm looking forward at a situation whereby they'll say, we'll not wait for the funds to come from Nairobi or from the exchequer, but as a self-help group, we are going to have it as terms of our policies that once in a quarter or once in a month, we'll have a community dialogue on violence against children. We're also looking for you and the mainstream media so that we have sustainable discussions on children issues, because we can't discuss, then I don't know how long it will take for us to be back here again, but how can we have it sustainable? The corporate organizations, we are looking forward to an extent whereby if Safaricom sends you an M-Pesa balance, then they remind you, remember to protect your child. You know, that time or just asking you, have you ensured your child is safe? How safe is your child in that environment? These kind of prompt messages, they are going really to help. But the public financing is a more of a collaborative approach. Yes, from the exchequer, yes, but we also need to understand that there is reason for us to collaborate so that we don't duplicate resources, but we use the little resources effectively to handle the issues of child protection. But again, it's also we are doing advocacy to all state and non-state actors to increase the funding in the children's sector. It is not very high, but something is working. But we are hopeful that with this kind of data and with this kind of qualitative analysis, it is going to inform policy reviews, even in terms of funding on the children's sector.
Very interesting, yes.
And just to add, maybe we didn't mention it earlier, but one of the gaps that we have again when it comes to violence against children is what we call political goodwill. How does it come in when we are talking about violence against children? It comes in through the aspects of legislations and policy creations. And we are looking forward that even in policy, even in those finance bills and those other aspects of finance, that the political class are able generally to consider children, because they are the greatest in terms of population. They are the high, their percentage are the highest, almost 50% of the population now. So there is also a discussion that we really need to develop now current costing models. And I know that is a discussion that already has been, we have been supported by UNICEF to come up with a costing model, and the Treasury was involved. So what will be remaining is that, do we have political goodwill so that funding is increased from government to go into sectors such as what we're talking about. Yes.
Is there, we've talked about, of course, the whole funding and intervention.
Yes.
But let's focus on child protection.
Yes.
What are the key ways of making sure your child is protected? Let's start with that.
Number one, I'm smiling. And I want to make this comment.
Right.
Almost all of us are child abusers. When we are not abusing them physically, we are abusing them emotionally.
Okay.
For example, even when you are at work here, you take long hours at work, and therefore you have only few hours with your child.
Right.
So the child at the end of it will have emotional problems because of lack of your engagement with him.
But what if you try to balance it?
Yes,
Yeah.
when it is balanced. But that is what the first comment I wanted to make.
Okay.
But there are several ways we can do to protect our children. One of those ways starts with you as an individual. And I call it responsibility, self-responsibility as a parent. That parents must be responsible when it comes to their children. And when they are responsible, therefore they should avoid neglecting their children. And the neglect, if you look at neglect, are those things that you do or fail to do. The omissions and commissions that at the end of the day affects that child emotionally, physically, and even sexually. So it becomes therefore violence against children. Then number two, what Mr. Wino had already talked about, that the government can come up with already programs, like currently under social development, Directorate of Social Development, there's parenting guideline that can be used to sensitize parents on the way of being better caregivers to their children. So that is also a very nice way, and it is available for even individual reads. So we are also looking at that, but we can also utilize technology, just like it has been put. When we using SGR to Mombasa, we should see in those screens violence against children, or avoid neglecting your children, such kind of that, the prompts. And then that will also help us, because it will be a constant reminder.
You know, realistically, sometimes when you think about it, especially in the African tradition,
yes,
let's say parents or grandparents, they're used to, they will hit a child if they want the child to do something. And they wouldn't see it as a form of violence. How would you educate that mother who's in somewhere in a rural home, who cannot access technology and doesn't know that's a form of abuse?
Again, before we intervene on this, there is a difference, a big difference between punishment and discipline. And for us, we advocate for discipline. And no law in Kenya prevents a parent from disciplining their children, provided they don't see what is punishment as discipline. And therefore, pinching, biting, kicking, verbal abuse becomes therefore abuses and no discipline. And therefore, we advocate for those. And discipline means that there is engagement between you and your child. And that is child participation. Yes.
Right. Okay. Let's now talk about the second international conference on child protection that is supposed to be happening 22nd, you mentioned?
Yes.
To 24th. Tell us, what is the objective of the conference and what do we expect people to get out of it?
Thank you. I think my colleague had earlier alluded to it.
Yes.
But the conference is bringing scholars, is bringing actors in the children's sector within Africa and even globally to come and share experiences, research-based, evidence-based, on what is the status of the child in terms of child protection. We are coming to share documentaries on the best practices, so that countries that will participate, Kenya being one of them, and the host, you know, it's actually Kenya that has conducted it twice in the continent. This is the second being of that. Time. So that we look at those research, because research does not lie, and evaluate our current position and see where are areas that we need to adjust in terms of legislation, in terms of interventions, in terms of funding and all that. What works We can borrow best practices from the countries where these things have worked, and then we praise them. But I'm very sure that some of them are also coming to learn from us as a country.
Yeah, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Yes, yeah. This conference is a unique conference because this particular conference, we are hosting it together with the NCAJ, and this is specifically the subcommittee on juvenile justice. And as a wing of the judiciary, this is what we call the Children's Month, where children cases are expedited. The other unique thing about this conference is that this year in Kenya, we experienced the Shakahola massacre. Which the greatest number were children. And therefore we are coming together as Africa and also listening and borrowing from other parts of the world so that we get to know what is this that we are not doing right, and how therefore at the end of the day, what stand are we going to take when it comes to violence against children. That's the reason why the theme talks about ending violence against children. But we have sub-themes, 9 of them, and we have what we call technology and back, we have culture and politics and back, we also have the policy and